Hello and welcome back to the AA Ireland podcast. We have a good one for you today, as usual, a special interview. We'll be doing the usual bit of chat about the cars we've been driving. Both myself and Paddy were away. Nice little experience there. Paddy, let's just delve straight into it straight away. What are we going to hear in the big interview today, just before we talk about some cars?
Over the last few weeks, we've been talking a lot about different modes of transport. We had the Dublin Commuter Coalition in. We were talking about the benefits of potentially doing a free trial for public transport. So I thought it would be interesting to hear from Irish Rail. So Barry Kenny is the spokesperson for Irish Rail. He has been for a number of years now, and we invited Barry into the studio here for a chat, and it's a wide-ranging chat. He talks us through some of the future plans they have, talks us through why we are where we are in terms of rail networks and what the future holds. So Barry's he's a master at his art, so it's a nice interview to listen to. Let's listen to that now. In the event that your car requires mechanical assistance, the AA offers our customers the ability to log a breakdown in our app. Log a rescue in the app within minutes and have an AA patrol at the scene to assist you in approximately 90 minutes. Browse the AA app today to obtain great discounts from our partners, which includes perks like discounted fuel at selected Circle K garages across the country. So, as I said, we are delighted to be joined this week by Barry Kenny, who's Head of Corporate Communications for Irish Rail. Barry is known as Mr. Rail. I know he's going to smile at that description. Barry, you've been in this role quite a while, right?
I have, I suppose. I mean, the company 29 years, wow, having joined on a 2-week work placement, and asked, "Do you want to hang around for a few weeks?" But although the kind of wider job has changed, I'm the lead spokesperson for the company 25 years now.
Wow. Yeah. I do remember you from my first time in AA when we were over in Suffolk Street, where you would pop in intermittently to do Morning Ireland or
it felt like we squatted in your office some of the time. Sorry about that.
So yes, you're sitting in what was a Road Watch studio, but is now a podcast studio. So look, the reason we have you here is it's really to chat about public transport and Irish Rail in particular. So take us back, set the scene for us, I suppose, in terms of railways in Ireland.
Yeah.
If we, it's often said, wow, in Ireland there used to be an amazing rail network, but now it's gone and they're having to put it back. So is there truth in that for a start?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, I suppose, not just in Ireland, but in a lot of countries, the kind of that, if you life cycle of the railways, I mean, our first railway line was 1834, so I'm not sure if I'll still be in the job when we hit 200 years, but not all that long away. And there was a gold rush in railways during that era. I mean, it was expanding as a means of mass movement. There was really nothing to compete. And if you take it that kind of roundabout, I suppose, the First World War, the 1920s, the network would have grown to about 5,600 kilometres. So a very extensive network in every county in the country. And, there are some kind of famous lines of that era that aren't there anymore. My in-laws in Tramore would always point to the Waterford Tramore Railway as an example. Then obviously, as I suppose, the car became a greater factor in lives, as costs became an issue, it did contract. If you through the 1950s, 60s, a lot of lines closed, and really, I suppose, down to about a network of about 2,000 to 2,200 kilometres overall. So it's not this kind of total wipeout, I think, that some people paint it as, but obviously significantly more, I suppose, limited network than it was. But still connecting, the vast majority of our major centres to Dublin. But the worm turns, and the congestion that the dependency on cars caused really has caused a renaissance, and it's not a new thing, but for public transport and the type of investment we've seen dating from the Dart onwards, which is coming up on 40 years next year, is something that has then brought things like the Lewis, that's something that's brought things like the investment in quality bus corridors, and then the bias in favour of public transport in the current National Development Plan.
Why do you think, can you point to one thing specifically that caused, I won't say the demise, but the reduction in rail service? Was it the introduction of the car en masse? Was it policy at the time?
It was both. It was, certainly the car, but there was a long era where, and I think Ireland and Britain shared this in a way that continental Europe didn't, where there was basically a kind of a lack of understanding what public transport is for, that it was simply looked at in a profit and loss basis. I remember reading headlines and it was, Éireann or CIE has lost this money in terms of how much our public service obligation or subsidy or however you want to describe it was caused. Whereas in the continent, it was looked at the same way as health, education, policing. It was part of the functioning of the state. So while we were basically, policy was here to underfund the railway or underfund public transport, and trains were turning into bangers, and they were very old. I'm thinking when I started to work, like in the 1990s. In Switzerland, you have this extraordinary network. I don't think there's a major settlement that's more than 5 kilometres from a rail station. Planning helps that as well. But, France, Germany, they all invested in high-speed rail around these times. And, of course, as people started to, travel more, they saw, well, why can't we have some of this? And as the economy then kind of recovered in the 1990s and that era onwards, and money became available, frankly, and initially it was European money and ultimately it became money funded from the Exchequer as well. The opportunity was there. We always had the plans, but now we were able to act on them and get people back. And people can see that when you put money into it and make it a fast and frequent service, that it is a great alternative and it is an essential part of living and planning and where we're going to put our houses and where we're going to put our businesses. A high capacity carrier, a Dart train, 8 carriages, can take 1,400 people. Build more of those and you can move more people and you can move more people more efficiently.
We're a week on from a discussion we had with the Dublin Commuter Coalition discussing, what are the alternatives to the car? Can we reduce our car use? And one thing that we had proposed at the time, possibly a little naively, was the idea of a free public transport trial. It set out a discussion. Yeah. There was a bit of chat around it. Where do you see rail fitting into the picture from your point of view at the moment?
Well, we see ourselves being the backbone. Because, as I say, we're the heavy carrier in terms of an individual vehicle, train, light rail, bus, whatever your alternatives are. We can move more people in a single go than any other mode. So developing that capacity, and with our Dart Plus programme at the moment, which is going to allow us to double the capacity of the Greater Dublin area, treble the electrification, brand new trains that are really going to transform people's experience, we'll be able to do a lot more of that. It'll also build our network to allow us to run more trains to and from the regions. We're also, and I think it's a fair criticism of the past, is all the investment goes to Dublin. That's not the case anymore. The Cork Commuter Rail Network, we are building Dart frequencies for those 3 lines, Cork Cove, Cork Middleton and Cork Mallow. We're getting double tracking Limerick to Limerick Junction. We've got Moyross station in development, more new stations in the Limerick area. Galway is going to be transformed as well, Waterford also. So we will always be that mode. But I think one of the crucial things is not treating each mode in isolation, is the fact that, and I know the Dublin Commuter Coalition will be very, very strong on this, it's like the last mile, how you get people to and from your stations, what facilities you have there. Obviously, car parking is something where there's pressure, but we've got to provide as well for more cycling facilities. We've got one of the things we're looking at with the new fleet, not looking at, will be part of the Dart Plus fleet, is charging on board, including for things like e-scooters. So it is about making it easier for your full journey to have public transport. And from our point of view, we'd love it to be rail if that's part of your journey in the centre of it. But the day you think of it as the full journey and our responsibility ends when you step off the train, that's gone and it can never be there.
As Irish Rail, do you have to fight for your slice of the overall pie when you're looking for funding, etc.?
I suppose like every part of infrastructure has the, I would say literally, right, and seriously, oh gosh, no, whatever, we don't. But if there's a finite pie, and we all know that there needs to be spending in health and education and energy infrastructure in all of these areas, is, we are all fighting for that. I suppose what we have now is probably better kind of, structures of it. So the National Transport Authority are responsible for example, developing the Greater Dublin Area Transport Strategy. So it's not a case anymore of, we've got to give, so much to this mode or this mode. It's an integrated plan. So we have our plans, in terms of the Maynooth and Drogheda and Kildare lines and building that capacity. Metrolink is factored into that, how we integrate, how we work together. All of the bus connects and the changes in the bus service is factored into that. Things like cycle lanes, as they're developed around the city, are going to be factored into that as well. So we are all working to a plan now, and I suppose the overall sector is the one that's really kind of, I suppose, fighting for that share as opposed to individual organisations. If the solution is rail, if that's what makes sense from the assessment, then that's what we go with. And it's very much more, I think, kind of evidence-based, really, than it probably once was.
The Green Party get criticised quite often, actually, as it turns out. Sometimes, there's no justification to it. Is it fair to say that this government, though, has done quite a lot to develop the public transport narrative?
Well, definitely, if you see that the kind of 2-to-1 public transport to private transport investment really is being achieved. We're seeing projects that we would have been very much hopeful to see develop in the past that are happening now, and I think that's something that certainly the environmental issue is at the core of. And, obviously we have a Green Minister for Transport, Eamon Ryan, who's very passionate about these issues and progressing that. We would be very confident, if governments change, and governments do change, whatever, that there is a cross-party support for that now. And certainly in our engagement, with politicians, all we're ever hearing is that people do want more rail. But it has been hugely important, I think, to have that impetus at this point in time, when the National Development Plan was being reviewed. The fines were, freight is something I suppose that in a kind of a motoring context we talk about. But the fines rail line is going to be re-established. Funding for that is there. Moving more containers onto rail, which is an area where we quite simply, we're an absolute niche player at the moment. We can multiply that. But certainly the fact that we have in every major city a live project happening that's going to improve the rail service, the fact that we have the biggest ever order for efficient, environmentally sound public transport vehicles, 185 carriages on order. Our total fleet right now for the whole country is just over 620. Under the order that we have, the first 185, we could potentially order up to 750 of those carriages over the next 10 years. So the scale of what's happening and our ability to meet people's needs is just going to be transformed.
I think it would be interesting for you to talk us through some of the big projects that are coming up, because we know that public transport in general needs to improve a little bit, and there is a desire to move into other modes. Talk us through some of the highlights that you see coming on stream.
I think probably the biggest and the most visible is the DART Plus programme, and everybody knows what the DART is, but it is about extending the DART beyond the current Malahide and Howth to Greystones, north to Drogheda, west to Maynooth and the M3 Parkway station, southwest to Hazel Hatch, and also then looking at what can we do further south of Greystones and to build the capacity to Greystones. A lot of it is infrastructure, so it's signalling to allow more trains to run. It's closing some level crossings, for example, on the Maynooth line, because if you've got more trains, those crossings will be down all the time and you're congesting everything. It's new depot, it's new facilities and new track capacity, new extra lines running into Euston Station. It's also that new fleet, as I say, the DART Plus fleet. It's being bought by Alstom. People know Alstom as the suppliers of the original Lewis. And this will, as I say, take the original DART carriages still operating today, which shows you the kind of life that you get out of DARTs, almost 40 years later. But these will expand our fleet, in time ultimately replace that fleet, and between accessibility, huge improvement, between family facilities, cycle facilities, huge improvement. So DART Plus is that family of projects.
Just in terms of the DART Plus, can you give us an idea of what capacity that will do? Will it increase or take people out of cars, that sort of thing?
The simple, I suppose, kind of answer to that is it will double the capacity. It will double the number of people who can take the train in the greater Dublin area. It will bring hundreds of thousands of people closer to high frequency services, and it is about that DART frequency, that turn up and go service for all of those lines around. It'll also benefit intercity lines because, of course, if you've got more slots for trains to operate through, it isn't only DARTs that are going to benefit from that. Going around the country then, investing in the actual lines around the network to improve journey times, which is critical. investing in the Cork area to again go to that dart frequency on the Cork area commuter network. So that's re-signalling. That's a new platform at Kent Station in Cork, and it's double tracking between Glanton and Middleton, which has been a hugely successful line since it was reopened in 2010. In the Limerick area, there's the Limerick Shannon Metropolitan Area Transportation Strategy, which is a bit of a mouthful, LS MATS. But again, the potential for rail in Limerick is huge because we've got a number of both existing and disused lines and a network around the city, and the city which suffers a lot. I think Limerick and Galway probably the worst cities in the country for traffic congestion. We can build up the communities around those areas and have more services. Then in Galway, brand new station, and Kent Station in Galway city centre is probably the best located city station in the country. You are right at Eyre Square. Transform it from basically a 1.5 platform now to 5 platforms, ultimately double track between Athenry and Galway, more trains from everywhere, opens up the possibility for new lines as well.
You didn't mention Donegal, you didn't mention Cavan, Monaghan. Any joy for those people?
I have to say, particularly Donegal people are absolutely very focused on the fact that there isn't a rail service, and as we pointed to, it was 1950s and 60s. It wasn't us, but nonetheless, it has been an issue that people feel that, well, you're talking about a national rail network, but here's a corner of the country that simply isn't covered. The All-Ireland Strategic Rail Review is underway. Now, that's the 2 government departments. It's the Department of Transport here, and it's the Department of Infrastructure in the north. That will be published this year. And what it is about is saying, right, we're looking at this now from a long-term point of view. What are the opportunities for the existing network to do more, and what are the opportunities for it to grow, and where can it serve? And it specifically is looking at Donegal. As I say, it is something that the 2 departments will be publishing in due course, but I think people that are looking for rail to Donegal, to other parts of the country that aren't currently served, there's probably never been a more hopeful time, and we'll hear that news at some point in the coming months.
When you talk about rejuvenating old lines, is there much that you can salvage from a closed or dormant rail line?
I suppose the best thing is if we still own the land, if we still own the alignment. So if you take the Western Rail Corridor, an issue of huge debate, some people want a railway, some people want a greenway, but north of Athenry up to Claremorris, Collooney, we still own all of that, right? So you're going to have to build a brand new railway line, but when you have the property, it's great. Really, if you're talking about old rail sleepers, things like that, no, you're not going to be using them. You are going to be putting down new infrastructure. Obviously, if you no longer own the line, the issue is what's been built on it in the meantime. Have the local authorities, protected it in some way? Navan is a project that'll be look like happening in the early 2030s, that was basically sold off. But there are sections of the old alignment that are still there that haven't been built on. Others not. But you also have to say, where are the people now? It isn't just a case of kind of taking the old route. It's where are we going to serve people better and connect them into that transport network overall.
Talk to us a little bit about fares. Fares have come down, and I think the result has been good. I think there's been a good uptake. Are you at a sort of a sweet spot now in terms of pricing, do you think, or do you think there could be improvements?
Well, I suppose the 2 biggest changes in fares in the last year was the 20% cut for all general fares, and then the 50% young adults fare cut. So before there was student fares, but now it's for all young adults, which is a lot more equitable. And that has been very significant. It's coincided with post-COVID, and it's coincided then with fuel cost crisis as well. So those 3 together, it's hard to isolate each one, but I think there's no doubt that it has addressed probably some of the concerns people had about value for money in public transport generally. The NTA actually regulate the fares. I think some people probably think it's something that we kind of decide ourselves on a whim, but they obviously, the public service payments to us and the fares is decided on. So things like the Leap Plus One promotion that happened over the new February bank holiday weekend, the NTA can decide and work with the transport operators, say, this is something we're going to try. It certainly is, as I say, particularly in terms of intercity, which is back at pre-COVID levels. Dart and commuter are probably about 90% of pre-COVID levels. I think that those changes have been hugely beneficial, and coupled with the fuel costs, that value for money kind of differential has changed significantly, and people perceive the value for money of our services really a lot more positively.
One of the discussions we had over the last couple of weeks was the introduction potentially of free public transport. Now, we only had discussed a trial. Firstly, can I ask you, what was your view on the trial idea?
I think the thing is, you want to be able to cater for the people that will then look to travel. And, there is probably, if somebody's experienced, it's free and you've got this kind of descent, when it happens for 48 hours and people have an unpleasant experience, that doesn't do you a whole lot of good in the kind of longer term of, promoting public transport as the right way to go. There are huge projects around building capacity now. And I think that combined with the issues like looking at congestion charges and that, can allow us to kind of look at those kind of promotions, look at very generous promotions, be it free, be it heavily discounted. But I think kind of free on its own right now isn't, it'll get a lot of attention. Is it the solution? Will it kind of answer the right questions? I'm not sure it does.
It's funny. It seems to be the conclusion that everyone came to towards the end of it. But the question that we kept putting back to people was, okay, but how do you get the people who can't be bothered their arse to try public transport to give it a go?
Yeah. There's a very small, well, not very small, there's a proportion of people who, for whatever reason, just won't, right? I'm in the cycle lane on the way in the mornings on the Clontarf Road now, where there's huge roadworks and the traffic is backed up and it's just miserable looking. And you kind of say, well, you've got a DART right there, you've got quality bus corridors right there, the new bus connects route. Some of you just are never ever going to do it, and look, it's freedom of choice in this world, whatever, and that is the case. But I think it is, its frequency, its reliability and its value for money are the three that come together. And on all of those, I think, what's happening now and the type of improvements should answer that question for people thinking of it rationally and logically. Some people just want to be on their own and be in their car and sit there looking at traffic fumes ahead of them. Good luck to them.
But is that where it becomes fair to start taxing people? If you look at London, for example, where congestion charge was brought in because, okay, guys, we've given you all the public transport and you're still using your car, so now we're going to charge you. Is that where it starts to become a little bit fairer to tax people in their cars a little bit more?
Where you provide a very strong alternative, of course, and particularly when we know that, like, from, congestion, from productivity, from health grounds, from all of these kind of assessments, the better thing is to take public transport or is to take active travel, that, if the bike lanes and everything have been provided for as well, that the network is there. Then yes, then absolutely. If somebody says, well, no, you'll take my car from my, cold dead hands, not the old Charlton Heston line in the rifles or whatever, then okay, if it's that much to you, you can pay more.
Where in the world has the utopian rail experience, in your view?
I think it's hard to look past the Swiss in terms of planning and in terms of how central it's been to the development of their transport network. I think the stat is that it's 5 kilometres is the furthest distance that any moderate-sized population base is from a train station. And, they are dealing with big Alps in the way as well. So it hasn't been a kind of a light consideration. You've obviously got then, and it's not comparable to what we're facing in any of our cities, some of the mega cities, particularly in Asia, where the kind of high frequency, high density that you can build around it makes it extremely sustainable. But I think on a European basis, the Swiss, we've been looking at Denmark as well, an area that probably similar kind of population dispersal to ourselves, but who a couple of decades earlier made the very conscious decision, we're building this around rail. And the kind of transformation in usage of the network and proportion of journeys by the network has been amazing.
In a previous job, I travelled on rail in Germany quite a lot. Yeah. Wow. It was something else. Yeah. It was the precision. It's a stereotype, but the precision was unbelievable.
Well, actually, the funny thing is, if you Google that now, you'll see that news reports in the last couple of years are about how there's been a lot of underinvestment in certain aspects of Deutsche Bahn. I think of the German network, and you're right. In terms of, I remember the old ICE trains. I worked for a summer in Munich. I think it was the summer they were introduced, actually, which date stamped me. But some of those, it just shows you've got to continue to invest in it. It can't be a case with public transport that, right, that's it, job done. It has to be continued to be maintained and address those issues, because even something as good as the German network can actually deteriorate.
So look, in your view, where has Irish Rail had its victories over the past few years? What are your celebrations? What is Irish Rail pretty proud of currently?
I suppose over the recent years, I think it has been the expansion of a lot of our commuter services around the network. So the DART has had that 10-minute frequency that we've built, but dealing with the population growth on areas like the Maynooth line, increasing that frequency, getting new fleets in. Like, we've moved from one of the oldest fleets in Europe, probably in the late 1990s, early noughties, to into the 10s, to having the youngest fleet. So that's been hugely important. I think the building the kind of the customer service aspect is crucial, because a lot of what we tend to talk about as we develop transport is the hardware. It's the new lines, it's the electrification, it's signalling, it's things like that. But our customer service officers now on intercity trains, I think the real customer service focus in our stations is something that is really paying dividends as well, and something we're delighted with too. And working, I think, with the other agencies and the NTA, got to be said, and I know it's kind of something that's maybe not fully in the past, but working through COVID, keeping everything going, keeping people safe, both our own staff and our colleagues. There was a real kind of collective effort there. We were all, the agencies ourselves, the NTA, on weekly calls every day, making sure if somebody had an idea that was working well, it was brought across all of public transport. And I think it's really kind of, strengthened that kind of model that's there now, where there's a kind of a coordinating approach to how we address issues in public transport.
What will the train of the future look like? So 5 years, 10 years time, will there be any differences both in terms of technology, how emissions, etc.?
Well, if you take the DART Plus programme, I would hope that by the end of this decade, if you're travelling in the Greater Dublin area and indeed in many other parts of the network, that you're travelling emission free, that you are on, in stations and on trains with transformed customer information, that have improved accessibility. The new DART Plus carriages are all going to have automatic retractable ramps facilitating independent access, which is crucial, that everybody can equally access our services, that whatever way you travel to and from the station, wherever you're going, that there is an easy connection for you by your own means, walking, cycling, micro-mobility, or by other modes as well, and that it is people's first choice, and certainly we feel the building blocks are there. And it's a funny thing, because as we were saying at the start, 29 years, it always changes. Like, you know what I mean? I've been through recessions and I've been through investment waves and the whole lot. And as you improve, the customer experience and the customer wish is for you to improve further. So it's always interesting, it always changes. But I don't think there's ever been, I think, as optimistic an era as there is now.
Something that got a disproportionate amount of attention is the trolley.
Oh yes,
trolley.
I thought we'd make it.
Talk us through the trolley story.
Well, I suppose the trolleys, it was COVID. It was pretty early, I think, probably before the national shutdown. We said, well, look, walking up and down a train and handing these things to people isn't probably the sensible thing to do. So with our provider, we said, let's put it on hold. And then very quickly, it became part of the government regulations that basically you had to wear a mask and you couldn't take it off for any purpose other than taking medicine. So that obviously meant, well, we can't be the ones effectively pushing something against the rules. So for the full 2 years of that regulation, there was no catering up until February of last year. So when it was lifted, and again, it was a relatively short notice, we said to the catering provider, okay, time to get back, time to ramp up. They did everything they could, couldn't get staff, and couldn't make the sums work for themselves. And ultimately in May last year said, we're pulling out this contract. It has been quite difficult and certainly a lot more difficult than we thought to get a provider to fill that gap in the meantime. And what's been heartening is how much people have missed the trolley. and I certainly haven't had a conversation like this, be it in a radio studio or podcast, that I haven't been asked about that in the interim. Thankfully, we will be back next month on the Dublin Cork route. Now, we'd love to have had at least some service on all routes, but just the costs and the way that the providers were quoting for it, we're going with Cork Dublin on all services. That means the people travelling to from Kerry and Limerick will have a catering service as well for the vast majority of their journey. And with Belfast, we'll have about 50% of intercity. We have to do a full tender for the rest of it, but certainly if the interest in our catering services is as high as it seems to be, we will have record sales when those trolleys start rolling again.
I was going to say, you're probably going to have a bumper year. Something I read about was the potential to put vending machines on trains. Is that something that's possible?
We are going to pilot the vending machines, definitely. We've found a provider that can look at that. And basically, I think it's about finding what the habits are. Are people going to use it? You know what I mean? Is it something that is the comfort of having the trolley come to your seat? Is that what people want in their catering service? Or are they happy then to be able to kind of pop up and down, whatever? So it is in the first instance to find out, is it something that people are interested in? We can look at expanding it then. We don't see it as a replacement. You are talking about, well, what are the kind of unique selling points about intercity travel? And one of them is, getting your sandwich, getting your cup of tea, getting the muffin to your table.
So Barry, the future looks strong for Irish Rail, and where do you see it making up the numbers in terms of the overall public transport network in the next, say, 5-10 years? Do you see it becoming stronger with all this investment?
It's going to be quite significant growth. We went to journeys of over 50 million just before COVID. We hope to be back at that level next year. By the end of the decade, we're hoping for about 80 million. So it is very much transformative. It is that kind of capacity and where people are building as well now. It's great. And we're part of it because we own some land around our stations and with people like the Land Development Agency, building up that. So where people live, work, where they socialise, that's going to be built around public transport. We're getting the infrastructure, the fleet, we're getting the customer facilities to bring people on board, and it really is going to be quite something where we start to hit those numbers and the people make that decision and make it first and make it easily.
Barry Kenny, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Paddy.
So what you make of that, Blake?
It's fascinating, the experience. You can just tell from listening to that man that he knows his stuff. He's been doing it for a few years now, as you said, and that kind of knowledge comes across. Quite passionate about it as well. I mean, you don't have a career like that and spend that long without being passionate and really believing in what you're doing. But yeah, fascinating. What I found was amazing, and I've seen the map since you actually did that interview of Ireland in 2023 compared to 1923, and the difference in the rail network, the coverage of just tracks on the ground is incredible. And
it's interesting as well to hear the fact that in some cases they already own the land, so it's not too much of an ask to refresh and rechange some of the existing lines. They obviously can't use the old infrastructure, but they can certainly use the land, and that's the issue. So yeah, look, another interesting one. Hopefully we'll get somebody from Dublin Bus Éireann over the next few weeks and months, because I think it would be interesting to hear from everyone really in this space. And of course that invitation is open to the Minister for Transport, Eamon Ryan, as well. We'd love to have you on if you are eventually listening to this. So look, other things we got to this week. You were in Spain.
I was, yes, getting my suntan.
You can't really talk about the car itself, but you were driving a covered version of the ID7.
That's right, yeah.
So we'll probably hold off on talking about that for now, because there's no point. You can't talk about driving impressions. You can't talk about the new tech just yet. So it's a car. It's obviously the spiritual successor to the Passat in EV form. Nice, I mean, as much as you can say nice looking thing when you saw it without the disguise.
Well, I suppose what I could do is just say to people, we've kind of already seen a lot of this already. We had the camouflaged one with the electroluminescent paint, but you can make out pretty much everything about the exterior. But I think you're right, let's not say anything. The embargoes, there's 2 separate embargoes on this between the exterior, the interior technology. So I'm just I'm keeping, so if it's leaked, it's not going to be because of me.
The other car that you were driving this week was the MG5. That was a really interesting thing, and we'll get on to the IONIQ 6 in a little while, but the MG5 is a really relevant car, and it's had a facelift and it's had a refresh.
Yeah, big facelift, and actually the face was lifted, as in, the front end of the car, aesthetically so much better now for me. The old one, I remember someone saying to me, that looks a bit like a VW Passat from 20 years previous. It's kind of got that does make sense. So at the back, largely unchanged. around the side largely unchanged. There's a few little bit changes, in terms of the chrome, the light and shape, but the big difference is at the nose where it had looked a bit dated. That's changed. Interior as well, huge leap forward. I mean, huge. Well, you were in the car a little bit as well.
Yeah, just a car that really impresses me. Obviously, we've been banging on about the MG4, MG5. MG5, I love the fact that it's an estate. It has a little bit of a honest, wipe clean personality to it, but it's now upgraded. It's a much more refined car. The quality of the interior is really good. The spec is excellent. I'd happily drive one of those every day.
Like it's on my shortlist. If I'm to replace my old Nissan Leaf, that's up there in the top 2, 3, 4 cars.
Sitting on bated breath to see what car you decide to replace the Leaf with. But the other thing we did this week, while Blake flew to Spain, I flew to Kildare.
You didn't fly, did you?
No, I didn't. I drove down to Kildare, where Hyundai were launching the new IONIQ 6, and I think the main takeaway from that, well, one, that the cars are a little unusual looking. The styling is. It's interesting to say the least. It's for me, it's a car of three halves. It's got the front of a coupe, Hyundai coupe, the middle bit of an SUV, and the rear of a Porsche 911. So that's an interesting melting of cars. And you can obviously look at our socials. You'll see the walk around tour we did of the car. But I think the main point of the launch was most people thought this car was going to be a lot more expensive than it turned out to be. I think a few of us were assuming it would start with a 6. It starts with a 4. So it's under €49,000. Starting off, and it's a well-equipped car, decent batteries, 5377, so decent range. We know, Blake, from those Korean brands that they tend to do an awful lot of what they'll say they'll do.
Yeah, especially with the original IONIQ and also the Kona. I mean, they were just range kings. Like, if we go back a few years before there was any talk of a Mercedes-Benz EQS or anything like that, you had the IONIQ, and that was the nickname for that apparently is the wind knife. It just cuts through the air in terms of efficiency. And the Kona obviously was great as well, the Nero. And I mean, losing their way is the wrong thing to say, but with the IONIQ 5, let's say it wasn't as efficient as the previous ones had been. So a few people were a little bit disappointed in the efficiency of the IONIQ 5, despite it being a great car all around, of course. But this one is a little bit different now. But you know more about that, obviously.
Well, yeah, I mean, the spec is impressive. The range looks really good on paper, and from the initial drive we had, I was seeing really, really strong figures in terms of economy. Now, we will have the car quite soon for a longer spell, so we'll probably hold off on doing a greater judgment until we've driven it some mileage. But yeah, I mean, for me, I prefer the styling of the 5 a lot more. So I'm not sure. I think the 6 is divisive in terms of styling, and I think they wouldn't admit that themselves. It's quite a Marmite car. You're either going to love it or hate it, and I think, but they'll sell 2,000 of them in a full year, which is a decent number.
Yeah, coming in at that price, and it's the range and efficiency that's going to be key here. I mean, this is still built on that EGMP platform, 800 volts of fantastic charging,
226 kilowatt hour charging, which is
10 to 80, yes, that's what it is. 10 to 80% in 18 minutes, theoretically. Now, we don't have those chargers in Ireland, and the battery needs to be nice and toasty, and we know that from the EV6 that you're not necessarily going to hit those speeds, but it's looking good for them.
Another car I spent some time in, and you did a bit as well, was the BMW i7, which was something that we drove last week. I wasn't so sure about it at the start, but by the end of the week I didn't like giving that car back. It's no range monster like the EQS. It doesn't perform as efficiently as the EQS, but as a car to drive, every day, it's too big for a start. Like, it was too big. It's 5.3 meters long. It's almost obnoxiously big, but as a piece of tech, wow, impressive.
Yeah, it's gigantic, isn't it? Yeah, what a tank. Like, I remember when I first looked at it and I went, wow, that is a big thing. Like, for example, I when I parked it in my driveway, because I had it for a couple of days, I couldn't get the other car out of my driveway. That's never happened before. Yeah, but you're right, it grew on me as well as a driver's car, and I took it for a spin down the back roads as well. And if we're comparing it to the EQS, so just as a driver's car down the back roads,
it's more engaging,
much more engaging. Hans Zimmer had his way with that orchestra.
That expressive mode is amazing.
Incredible. Yeah, the only thing is then, if we're talking about the EQS, if those country roads go past 300 kilometers, then you want your EQS back, because it's got a lot more range. It's that bit more efficient.
Look, for me, I think if I was buying an EV tomorrow, I'd probably still go with the i4. That's my kind of favourite at the moment. But no, this is an impressive piece of kit. We are close as well to seeing the i5, so that's imminent as well. So that's going to be interesting. Another point that came at the launch of the IONIQ 6, which I suppose is interesting to clarify, it surrounds the reduction in the SEI grant. My understanding from talking to Stephen Gleeson, MD of Hyundai here in Ireland, was that if you have ordered your car, it doesn't really matter when it's registered, within reason, that you'll still get the full grant. It's the analogy he said was, and the price they showed for the IONIQ 6 was a now price and a July price. So if you've walked into your Hyundai dealership today and said, okay, I want an IONIQ 6 all-wheel drive finesse, and they said, okay, fine, but you'll get it in August, you'll still get the full grant.
Yeah, because it's the dealer that applies for the grant for you. You don't do anything yourself. Yeah, so once you put down the order, they'll say, yeah, we've got a car coming in, ascribe to that person and apply the grant to that. You don't really do anything with it.
No, exactly. So it's the people who walk into the showroom on the 2nd of July and say, hi, I'd like an IONIQ 6, please. They're the people who now will get the reduced grant. They're still a little bit unclear, but they think, as far ahead as potentially October, that will be that'll be in play. There is a feeling that the grants might change again early next year, but for now anyway, because it's a point that I had got wrong. I had assumed that you needed to reg the car before the 1st of July, but it's not the case. So we may talk about that again.
Yeah, and let's remember, it's not the only grant that's available. We've also got the VRT relief, and prices are changing daily anyway. So massive price drops from Tesla. The IONIQ 6 has come in a lot cheaper than
but do you think the two are
expected.
linked? I wonder if Tesla had not done that, would the IONIQ 6 be the price it is now?
Well, the cynic in me is screaming absolutely yes, but obviously there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah. Well, look, I think we will leave it there for this week. Blake, what's happening in the next couple of weeks anyway? Are we driving anything else interesting?
Yeah, we've a few nice cars coming up. Actually, it's going to be
a heavy schedule. Actually,
a busy month. We've a couple of more consumer-focused videos and experiments coming down the line, which are exciting. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to
emerging in our video content. We did one recently. If you haven't seen it, we did a test using the Skoda Enyaq and Skoda Kodiaq and showed the difference between driving at 100 and 120 on a motorway. So check out that video if you do have time. So that's it for now. From me, Paddy Common,
and from me, Blake Boland.
Take care. See you next time.